Now, Travis is back in Fallujah. Back to the book. Travis had seen his share of blood, but never needed to wash any from his hands. That all changed in January, less than a month after he returned to Fallujah for his second deployment. Travis and his fellow MIT members went on combat patrols virtually every day, sometimes running as many as 3 missions over a punishing 18-hour span. In Fallujah and throughout Iraq, Marines, soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Iraqi troops did everything from hunting insurgents and weapons caches to disposing of dead bodies. Adding to 321 MIT's challenges were joint patrols with the Iraqis through some of Fallujah's most dangerous sectors. The Iraqi soldiers would sometimes respond to the slightest sign of violence with what some U.S. team members nicknamed the Iraqi death blossom. When a shot was fired in their direction, the Iraqis would sometimes form a circle and fire in every direction with little regard for consequences, including tragically catching innocent civilians in a crossfire. Civilian casualties were sometimes an unavoidable reality of war, but Travis and his fellow Marines were determined to use every means at their disposal to prevent them. While some MIT team members understandably became frustrated with the often untrained, underpaid Iraqi soldiers, Travis positioned himself as a mentor. During lunch, he would bring his chow to their mess hall and sit with Nick, an Iraqi translator who helped bridge the gap between U.S. and Iraqi armies. They not only talked about combat strategy, but also simple things like soccer. So this is just pure professionalism. That's what that is. Pure professionalism.
Well, I had a chance to go over to Iraq in 2010, and I met with the Iraqis that Travis served with. And they said that, Lieutenant Manion would always come over and sit down and eat with us and talk with us. And it was part of what you needed to do, right? If you're gonna be there and be their brother and help them with the mission they had, you got to be part of what they're doing. Yeah. And he understood that. I mean, it's not like unlike Brendan would. When you're playing athletics, you sort of get that teamwork piece. If you're going to make it work, you got to all be together.
Yeah, and it's the book makes it sound like it's fairly easy to do that. It's not, man. It's hard. There's a huge cultural difference between Iraqis and American, and it's not that big of a deal. But I'll tell you what. You're overseas. The one time you can kind of relax is when you get to sit down and eat your chow, and you're in the chow hall, and you're actually fairly well protected most of the time. You don't have to worry about anything. You clear your weapon before you go in the chow hall. I mean, it's usually a relatively safe place, and you get to relax and get to be around all your American friends, and it's good. To deny yourself that, and now you're going into, because at this time you can't give full trust to the Iraqis. You're gonna eating with them. The conversations are stilted. It's just not this little thing. It's a big deal. It's a big deal to make that extra effort. And clearly, how many times, I'm pretty engaged in my job. You know how many times I ate with Iraqis when I was in Iraq on my last deployment?
Oh, man.
Maybe twice. Maybe twice.
Yeah.
Maybe twice. Because when I was in a different position, but maybe twice.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, they recognize that.
Oh, for sure.
When I went over, they talked about that quite a bit with me,
yeah.
And how they'd recognize that and how it was important to them.
Yeah,
and he knew that.
He absolutely did. That's the point. Is that he knew it. He knew that making that sacrifice, building those relationships, that was his primary mission, or at least one of his primary missions, was to build relationships with these Iraqi soldiers so that they could get to know them, so they could build trust, and so that they would go out there and do their job. So
Perform, yeah.
Professional at all times. And this is another really good example of Travis's leadership. Back to the book. Just as some U.S. Marines became frustrated by the raw battlefield tactics of the Iraqis, which could put all their lives at risk, some Iraqi soldiers rolled their eyes when Americans gave them orders. Whereas previous Marine lieutenants had barked instructions at the Iraqi army leadership, Travis took a different approach, starting with a knock on the door of the Iraqi lieutenant Jalal. "Good day, Lieutenant. I was wondering if I could speak with you about the upcoming raid on the high-value target in the industrial sector, Travis said through the interpreter. I was wondering what time you think you would like to execute our mission. I think 5 p.m. would be a good time to leave, Jalal replied. My men had a long day, and I don't want to keep them up too late. Okay, Travis said, but I'm wondering if you might consider leaving a bit later, possibly after sunset. My concern is that our presence during daylight could endanger neighbors who live near the house we're going to strike, not to mention little children who could be playing in the street. Respectfully, Lieutenant, I wouldn't want to be the one to tell their parents that their son or daughter might still be alive if we had waited a couple more hours. After a pause and a sip of water, the Iraqi officer nodded. The raid would not start until 8 p.m. So again, real leadership. And I talk about this all the time in here. You know, the real leaders aren't barking orders. The real leaders are the ones that are flanking and using indirect approaches with the people that they're trying to influence. And there's just a phenomenal example of that.